Well, hello and welcome back. What we have today is the G820, which is a set from the mid to late 60s. Now, this set has been seen on the channel before, but not in its own video. Quite a while ago, I'm not sure exactly when, but I'll put one of those link cards in. We did the G817, which looked very similar to this. It was an earlier model. This was a much improved one, and I'd shown this as part of that video, but it wasn't really the subject of that video, and I said I wasn't going to do a proper video on this because there wasn't really much to do on it. It worked, and there wouldn't be a lot to say. Now, why have I changed my mind about this? Well, actually, this is quite a important radio to me. It's a model of radio that I remember my family having in the early 1970s. I think it was still being made then, even though it started being made in the 60s. And a lot of my early interest in radio was from fiddling around with one of these G820s. And you might also notice that if you look at the logo on the front page of the channel, you'll see it's actually a screenshot of this tuning scale here. So it does have significance, and I'd retrieved it from storage and thought I'd have a look at it and see how it is. Now, this is advertised as an 8-band radio. It's not actually an 8-band radio. If we take a look more closely at it, so it really only has 5 bands: medium wave, long wave, FM, VHF, shortwave 1 and shortwave 2. But the medium wave, shortwave 1 and shortwave 2 also have these BS versions, which stands for band spread. And now band spread is a separate button here which locks in. You can press it on VHF as well, but it doesn't do anything. And what that does is it switches you from the normal scale. So if you look at this top scale for medium wave, it switches you to this different scale and basically expands it out. If you look here, you'll see that the band spread scale for medium wave goes from 185 meters up to 210, possibly a little bit further up. Now, if you look 185 to 210 on the real medium wave, it's a very small area there you have to tune around in. So with lots of stations there, it would be quite difficult to get the right station. Whereas to get Luxembourg on this, it's nice and big here and easy to aim for. Now, of course, nowadays there are almost no stations left in the medium wave band at all, but certainly in that area, since a lot of them closed down. So it's not particularly useful. More useful are the ones on the shortwave. So shortwave, it tends to be divided into bands. As you can see here, you've got your 31 meter, 41 meter, 49 meter, 60 meter, and so on. And you can see that when you select band spread 1, it spreads out the 31 meter band a bit, and when you select band spread 2, it spreads out the 13 meter band a bit. Let's have a look at some other features of this radio. Obviously, you've got your tone and volume controls. The on and off switch is on the tone control, which was a thing for GECs. Also, some Bush radios. You'll notice it's got, well, you won't notice at the moment, if I turn it round, you can see it is equipped with 2 separate telescopic aerials, one for shortwave and one for FM. That's obviously a very good idea. It gives your domestic pets and children twice as many opportunities to destroy your receiving equipment as they would otherwise have. The shortwave aerial, if you pull it up, it's just a straightforward whip aerial. There is no moving around of it. You can't pivot it. The FM aerial, you can, as usual, move it around. There's no real need for shortwave aerial there's no directional polarity really. Some of the logos have come off this, which we'll come to in a moment, but essentially you've got I'm not sure which order they're in, the headphone socket here and a tape recorder output socket, both the old 3.5mm mono versions, and can't quite see it again, I'll just move the camera a little bit. There's a tuning meter here which also doubles up as a battery meter, which again is a fairly common thing of sets of that era. When we turn it around, we have this little leatherette insert here, and I pull that out, and first of all we've got a nice circuit diagram on the back. I mean, how common would that be? That's not very common. It's not very hard to read because it's white on black and it's very small, but you do get the circuit diagram there. And also this lovely thing here, which is a map of the world showing all the time zones. There used to be a little pencil in there as well, and also a little book for logging your station listening. So in here you've got the manual for the radio, but also on the other side of that you've got this logging chart. And what this allowed you to do was when you'd found various shortwave stations around the world by tuning around, and when there were many things to listen to, like Voice of America or Radio Moscow or whatever, you could record the call sign of the station or whatever, and where it was, the time that you'd found it, which band it was in, your frequency, and also the log scale, point on the log scale, so you could find it again. Now, the whoever owned this radio before has not written in this book. Maybe they never found anything interesting, maybe they never realised the thing was there. But that's a nice little touch there. Now, one of the things that's always been a problem for me with this set was the lack of these finishing plates here, the legends, which had fallen off it over the years when I got hold of it. And I waited for a while until I could find another one that I could possibly rob them from. And I did eventually find another G820. And here it is. And this has got, although it's a bit dented, the original plate here. It's got a bit bashed up, but it's got the GC logo. Also, it's got the bit here that tells you, yeah, that's the tape, that's the earphone and the tuning. So it's got all the labelling on. And also at the bottom here where it says 8 waveband universal receiver, which, as we know, it's not. Now, it's interesting to look at some of the differences between the two sets. This one has never worked at all. I've never got a sound out of it, and I didn't really bother about that because, as I said, I only wanted to rob some bits off it, really. One of the things that you might notice pretty quickly is the tuning scale. So on this older one, apart from the fact the paint has come off and it's not in very good state, you can see there are differences in that its band spread features Caroline here. Now, Caroline was a pirate radio station which was set up in the 1960s when you couldn't really get any pop music on British radio stations. I actually did a video about the evolution of British radio, mentioned the pirate stations then. In 1966-67, basically the government bowed to pressure from the BBC, which didn't want this sort of competition, and closed the pirate radio stations down by law. The BBC was then compelled by the government as a quid pro quo to try and attempt to offer a pop music service, which it really didn't want to do. Most of them closed down on the orders of the government in 1967, but Caroline actually carried on broadcasting in defiance of the law and were regularly raided, taken off the air, came back or whatever. They're now a legal radio station and use one of the BBC's old AM transmitters, but they're also available on DAB and internet radio. But it's interesting that although not a legal station, it was marked on this set. And of course this is pre-Radio 1, because as you can see on the long wave here we have light, and also on VHF you can see we have light, third and home. Now if we look at the later version, you can see that we have radios 2, 3 and 4 here on VHF. Caroline has disappeared, and we have Radio 1 here on 247, which would have been the light programme, and the light programme on 1500 metres long wave is relabelled as Radio 2. Another change in the design which I find interesting is the legends on the top for these things. So they put a plate on here with the labelling for the waveband change switches. If you look at the earlier one, you can see that it was just engraved into there, and it's of course faded out over the years. So they probably thought, well, you know, this isn't actually very good, and they put a plate on instead, although they kept the engraving on the new one for the separate telescopic aerials. On the current one there's a bit of a dent in the handle. This handle actually isn't in much better shape, and somebody's just put a load of tape around it, so I don't think it's worth changing the handles over, to be honest, so it's possible to do so. These faceplates on the tone and volume controls are a lot less yellowed on this one than they are on the newer one, and there is a bit of yellowing over the whole thing, and obviously you don't notice it mostly with the fact that it's brown, but you do notice it on the supposedly silver bits, and I suspect there was a smoky family involved in owning this radio, and what didn't go in their lungs ended up on the radio. It does also seem to create a slight bronze effect here on the grill. And the grill is in better state on this one. Actually, I think the yellowing of that makes it look quite nice, so I'm quite pleased about that in a way. Now, when I was showing this in the previous video, I said, well, you know, there's not really anything wrong with it. That doesn't seem to be the case now. So that's something else I've got to look at. I'm just going to put the battery in. I'll show you what I mean. So I'm on medium wave at the moment. Tuning things around here.
Into the first round, not got the first punch. You might find yourself in a bit of difficulty if that doesn't happen.
Yeah. I mean, any suggestion that Eddie was somewhat hands-off is kind of brushed aside by the sporting director, Paul Mitchell himself.
To me, the turn control doesn't seem to make a lot of difference. Perhaps that's something else to look at. I'd never really noticed that before.
We're right up to...
But the medium wave seems to work. Well, I'll say that. So I could pick up Talk Sport there, which is one of 2 stations that are really receivable.
Levied against the serial manufacturers or the regulators. That's my area of expertise.
There is 5 Live. Actually, both those are in the wrong place, so that should be 330. Should be a little further on. So maybe an alignment issue there.
And a lot of the language.
And long wave. We have got radio 4, and again that's a bit out. That should be on 1500. It's around 1400. Shortwave, doubt whether we'll hear much at this time of the day. We can give it a try. I mean, it sounds as if it's probably working, but there's nothing to listen to or nothing we can pick up at the moment. Now, the one that has a problem is the VHF.
Bendy, 08085 95 96 81333 on the text. I'd love to hear from you all. What have you collected over the years? What's your favourite?
Very intermittent.
Lots of them are little ones as well.
Now, this set is full of those AF series transistors, and I've never changed any of them. There's all the original stuff. Now there seems to be a problem where it's a bit intermittent and you knock it a bit and it starts working on VHF. I suspect therefore that one of those AF series transistors has gone, and it's a bit of a nightmare, as we saw in the one with the 817, to get at the tuner. There's not much difference in the circuitry between the two, but it's in a can, which is quite difficult to get at, so that might be a problem for us to deal with. So I'm going to have a look at the electrical things first, such as the tone control not working and the VHF being intermittent, and then we'll look at the cosmetic things of getting the logos reattached. So I managed to get the can off the FM section, which was not easy. I mean, well, there's 2 screws, but then it's all blocked in behind other screws, so you have to lever it about a bit. And the next problem that you have is that if I just move this around a bit, the whole board is not just clipped onto here, but soldered onto the tuning capacitor in various parts as well. So it's quite a nightmare to get it off and change anything on it, which is certainly the problem that I also had with the old 817. Now at the moment, if I turn this up, I've got some reception. I'm being the aerial here because obviously I've removed the aerial from the case. So that sounds okay with the little toy speaker that I've got connected to it. Tapping the transistors here. Doesn't seem to make any difference to it, so maybe it's just a bit of contact that's happening between the can and the rest of the board, which would be quite difficult to sort out. I suppose I could just fill it up with a load of insulating tape, which is what somebody's already tried to do by the looks of things. Looking at these bits of yellow tape on here, and maybe that's just not enough and we need to put a bit more on, but it seems to work okay without that. Or should I just change the transistors anyway, given that they're AF series and they're likely to go and I don't want to have to take it apart again? I don't really fancy it. That one is quite tight into the thing, and I know that there's like 3 or 4 bits of metal you have to unsolder from that board. It's quite easy to destroy it. So I'm sort of tempted to leave well alone. There's one big electrolytic here, which is a reservoir capacitor just for that board across the power rails. That seems okay, and actually you could change it pretty much without taking the can off anyway, but I think that's all right. Looking at the rest of the set, there's a lot of these nasty old red capacitors. Now, as I said, I'm not a big fan of changing capacitors willy-nilly, but these red ones are a bit iffy. These old red electrolytics are a bit rubbish, really. So I think I might change those anyway. But as I said, it doesn't necessarily appear that the transistors in this are faulty. So the tone control is just this variable resistor here in series with a capacitor which is supposed to be 50 nanofarads. And when I took the capacitor out, it measured out as 150 nanofarads, which is a bit high. I've replaced that capacitor. You can't really see it here because it's so tiny compared to the old one. See if I can just get it into place. So there's the new capacitor. And yeah, this old one was measuring really quite badly. And then I noticed it's one of those Hunt's capacitors. And Hunt's are not very good. So, change that. So tone control's working again. So that's all sorted out. So I think I can put it back together.
Cambridge's weather becoming cloudy with the chance of showers this evening. Heavy in places with the risk of thunder. A high of 26 Celsius, 79 Fahrenheit. For an update anytime, you can ask your smart speaker to play BBC News for Cambridgeshire.
The sound of Cambridgeshire. And all the music you love. BBC Radio Cambridgeshire.
So yes, this one is done. It turned out it was just the screening can for the FM front end that was contacting something on the board, which was causing the intermittency, not, as I suspected, one of the transistors. This has got to be the only set I own, and possibly have ever seen, which is full of these AF series transistors, and it's still working without changing any of them. I don't know how much you can really tell on YouTube from the sound quality. It isn't quite up there with the sort of things like Grundig's. And I wouldn't expect it to be. I think this is a much cheaper set, which is probably why we had one of these and didn't have a Grundig Yacht Boy. But nevertheless, I do remember this set fondly, and it is quite a nice set still. I thought better of changing these because I worked out by trying to take one off the other one that it's quite difficult to get it off without just creasing it, and then it doesn't look good when you put it back on. And I did find using a bit of, what was they call it, Autosol, it's sort of abrasive polish that you use to get chrome up to scratch on cars. That seems to work quite well with this, and has improved it, removed some of the yellowing at least. The other thing I did with it was I found in the other unit that the pencil was still in place. Again, I don't know whether that's the original pencil. It doesn't look very used. Now, I think it was used because the other one has got entries in the logbook, which this one doesn't. Anyway, I put the pencil in here. So there we go. There's the GEC G820 inspiration and logo for this channel. Not a very popular or really very available set nowadays. They don't seem to have been saved as much as Grundig's, and there are probably good reasons for that. But nice to have it back in service. I'll see you on the next one.